Dr. Andy Galpin, great to be back. Today we're going to talk about endurance, and I'm very interested in this conversation because I, like many other people, strive to get a certain amount of cardiovascular work in each week. Maybe a long-ish jog, maybe a swim, ride the bike, etc. But when I think about the word endurance, the idea that almost immediately comes to mind is about doing something for a long period of time repeatedly. But I have a feeling that there are other ways to trigger this adaptation that we call the endurance adaptation. So I'm excited to learn about that. I'm also excited to learn about the fuel systems in the body that allow for endurance and other modes of repeated activity. So in order to kick things off, I'd love for you to frame the conversation by telling us, what is endurance? And are there indeed a large variety of ways to induce what we call this endurance adaptation?
Sure. The way I want to start actually here is calling back to some of the things we talked about in our previous conversations, which are really, people exercise for three reasons. Number one, you want to feel better. Number two, you want to look a certain way. And then number three, you want to be able to do that for a long time, right? So you need, the way that we say it in sports is look good, feel good, play good, right? So I want some sort of functionality to be able to perform a certain way, whatever that is for you. You want to be able to look a certain way, that whatever that matters for you, and then you want to be able to do that for a long time. So when it comes to endurance, we have a bunch of misnomers here, which is the same thing with the strength training or resistance exercise side, where we wanted to dispel this myth that I lift weights only because I want to gain muscle or play a sport. And I want to do cardio because I want to either lose fat or for long health sake. And just like we smashed that myth from the strength training side, I want to smash it from the endurance training side. There are so many other reasons that you want to perform endurance training, regardless of your goal, right? Whether it is longevity, whether it is performance, or whether it is aesthetics. And so I want to cover all those reasons, exactly what to do, protocols, of course, and why those things are working that way. In general, though, the quick answer is really endurance comes down to two independent factors. Factor number one is fatigue management, and then factor number two is fueling. And that's all it really comes down to. So all the different types of training are going to reach a limitation, which are either, again, your ability to deal with some sort of fatigue, and that's generally a fatigue signal. The other one is managing some sort of restriction of energy input. And a lot of the spoiler here is a lot of the times people think it's a fueling issue and really it's a fatigue management issue, or the opposite. And to have a complete health spectrum, regardless of whether you're a high performance athlete like I typically deal with or general public, you need to be able to do both. Manage fatigue as well as understand fuel storage. So that's really what we're going to get into today.
Fantastic. I can't wait. Before we dive in, I'm going to ask you what I often ask people who are expert in their respective fields, which is there any non-obvious tool or mechanism or tool and mechanism that can allow people to access better endurance? You know, when I think about training for endurance, again, I think about trying to run longer and longer each week, or swim further and further, and so on. But I do wonder whether or not there are other forms of training that can amplify the endurance adaptation that I or most people perhaps don't think of as endurance.
Sure. The way I want to answer this is, if we look back and think about how we've answered that question with power and strength and force production, it is really about how much can you produce maximally once. What you're asking now is, how can I repeat that same quality of performance? If that's the case, endurance really comes down to your ability to maintain proper mechanics. That's going to, like, the biggest way we can increase your endurance exponentially very quickly is mechanical. And this is starting with breathing. And so we need to be breathing properly. We need to have proper posture and positions, and then we need to be moving well. Efficiency is going to trump force always for endurance. The other side of the equation is not that. You can have a little bit of leaks in your mechanics and still squat well or jump high and be fine, because you don't have to suffer those consequences repeatedly, right? That's going to drain you over time. So the quickest way to improve endurance is to improve mechanics. And the mechanical thing I would go after first is your breathing techniques, your pattern, your entire approach, as well as your posture. And then from there, the third one would be your movement technique.
Is it possible to describe the best way to breathe when doing endurance training, or is it far more complex than that? And if it is far more complex than that, then certainly we can get into it during today's episode.
Yeah, it is both of those. I will give you a quick answer though. A lot of the times you can kind of hit the cheat code, which is nasal breathing. There's plenty of times when you don't want to nasal breathe or don't need to nasal breathe, but just again, as like a one tool that is for a pretty general answer, if you can do that, a lot of the times that will fix breathing mechanics just by default. And we can maybe talk about why that is later, but that would be my sort of one sentence bullet point answer immediately of how to get in the right positions. The second one would be simply looking at your posture, right? So whether you're on a bike or you're doing a lift or you're running, if you're literally hunched over and your ribs are touching your femur or getting closer and closer, like tends to happen on a bike or an air assault thing for somebody I've seen recently.
This morning, I was on the assault bike doing a sprint, and I asked Andy, Dr. Galpin, to critique my form and anything else he wanted to critique so that I could improve. And he did comment on my rather C-shaped posture.
Correct.
Encouraged me to be more upright, which I should probably do now as well. And he also cued me to the fact that during a 1 minute sprint, there is something that is quote unquote magic that happens right about the 40-second mark.
Yep.
And I use that as a milestone to look for. And indeed, something does happen at the 40 seconds into a 1 minute sprint where all of a sudden it does seem to get much easier for reasons I don't understand. Maybe you can tell me that, but it certainly had nothing to do with my posture. My posture needs improvement. Thank you.
Well, yeah. So breathing mechanics and breathing strategies. People tend to be over breathing early on, and this is going to lead to problems later. So having a more strategic breathing pattern and approach is, again, a very quick solution.
I know that we're going to dive very deep into the mechanisms of energy and metabolism and endurance today, but as long as we're having a discussion about these brief sort of tidbits of how to improve endurance, are there any other ways to improve endurance that are of relatively short time investment, even if they require a lot of energy?
Sure. The classic paradigm you're going to find here is steady state long duration posed up against what a lot of folks will now call higher intensity interval training specifically. And there's a lot of misconceptions here. The quick answer is you need to be doing both. And there's probably a bunch of stuff in between that you should be practicing. If you honestly want to maximize those three factors we talked about at the beginning, you need to be training across this full spectrum. Just like I told you to train across the full spectrum of your lifting, we want to be doing the same thing here. So are there independent special factors that can happen with the shorter time length, higher intensity stuff? Absolutely. There's also magic that happens on the other end of that spectrum. So it's very important that people don't just choose one side, because what tends to happen is people either go with I'm going to do 30 or 45 minutes of steady state stuff. That's it. Or I'm going to do the opposite, which I'm going to leave that stuff on the table, not do it, because I only want to do high intensity intervals because I can get it done in 5 minutes. So there's magic on both sides of the equation. We want to get into all of that. But just to answer your question directly, there's a whole bunch of things you can do in under 1 minute that are convenient to do. And there's a wonderful set of papers out of a couple of laboratories in Canada that champion this idea that's called exercise snacks. So there's a series of studies that have been done here that are really interesting, and they've looked at a couple of things that are noteworthy. One of them is a 20-second bout of all-out work, and this is actually done in workers in an office. And so what they had them do is run upstairs, and I believe it was about 60 steps is what it took them, something along the order of 20 seconds exactly. And they repeated that about once every 4 hours. So really, it's just you go to work, you get put your coffee in your bag down or whatever, you run up a flight of stairs. 20 seconds later, then you go right back to work at lunch, and before you go home, you sort of repeat it there. And if you repeat that, that's multiple times a week you're going to do that. I think in one of the interventions, it was 3 times a week for 6 weeks. 18 total times you did that. And what you'll see is a noticeable improvement, and this is statistically significant, improvements in cardiorespiratory fitness, specifically VO2 max, as well as a number of cognitive benefits, work productivity, etc. That can happen in as little as 20 seconds. You don't have to go to the gym. You don't have to shower. You don't have to do anything like that. Just find the stairs, run up and down them a few times. Now, you may have noticed, you actually sort of caught me yesterday. I did that right here, right? We had a little bit of a break. I was feeling an energy lull. I ran up the stairs 3 or 4 times, felt a lot better. So That can actually also help. They ran another study where they looked at that following a giant high glycemic index meal. And what they saw, and then they took insulin measures and a whole bunch of other biological markers associated that you want to pay attention to with the high glycemic index meal. And they looked at those immediately, an hour, 3 hours, 6 hours as opposed. And it was very clear that same intervention was able to improve postprandial glucose control, insulin, and a whole bunch of other factors in addition to that. So if you are the sort of type who's like, wow, I'm in an office all day, maybe also had a giant high glycemic index meal, not the best approach, but a little bit of mitigation there can just be running up a flight of stairs or doing something like that for as little as 20 seconds. So there's a lot of magic and power in maximal exertion.
If one does not have access to a flight of stairs at work, could they do jumping jacks?
Absolutely. I mean, you could do anything you really wanted. It's not the mode of exercise that matters here. It is simply the exertion. You just get up as hard as you can. You could do burpees. You could do any number of things. You could sprint down your road, down the hallway, back and forth. The mode is just something that was easy for the scientists to control. And X number of steps, people could do it. You're not going to fall, hurt yourself, things like that.
Just to remind me, it's once every 4 hours, 1 minute of all
20
out.
seconds.
Oh, 20 seconds, excuse me. 20 seconds of essentially all out exertion.
Yep.
While remaining safe, not going so fast up the stairs or doing jumping jacks so
And
fast.
certainly not down the stairs. Up the stairs, please.
Right. Escalators don't count. Well, I suppose they count if they're, if you're moving, if you're not remaining on the same steps. In fact, in an airport recently, I saw somebody walking against the conveyor while talking on the phone while waiting for their flight to take off. And I thought it's genius, right? It looked a little awkward.
Who cares?
Yeah, but it was
I have looked awkward
cool.
in every airport I've been in for the last 15 years for these exact reasons, doing wild stuff like that.
Yeah, well, nothing's more awkward than not being able to walk to the end of the terminal simply because one isn't familiar with walking that far carrying a couple of suitcases.
There you go.
Yeah, that's the other fit test.
100%.
The suitcase carrier in the airport. No, I love this. So once every 4 hours, 20 seconds. So maybe once when arriving to work, once 4 hours in, and then 4 hours. Most people are probably at work somewhere, 8 plus or minus 2 hours.
Now, one thing I actually really want to make clear, because your audience is so incredible, they tend to be really excited about these protocols and they follow them exactly as written. That's not exactly how science works. So it doesn't necessarily have to be every 4 hours. It doesn't have to be 3 times a day. It doesn't have to be 20 seconds. They literally built that protocol because they're trying to replicate a real life scenario. Maybe you're in an office building, you're generally there for 8 hours. Let's see if you did one every sort of, so if you want to do it 4 times a week, great. If you can do it only 10 seconds, amazing. You're probably going to get the same benefits. Those are not the details to pay attention to. The detail to pay attention to is every so often, multiple times a day, try to get your heart rate up really quickly. Doesn't require sweating, doesn't require anything else. There's no warm-up associated with it. Again, you need a minute break in between meetings or whatever, and you can sprint up them. I do this all the time in my house. When you have those days when you're on like 7 straight hours of Zooms, etc., you can get out of 20 seconds. I run to my garage, which is over there. I hop on the air bike, and I will just smash out 30 seconds as fast as I can, and then walk right back in.
Love it.
Yeah.
I'm going to start.
Yeah, just also, you can just put one of those things, which I do also, just put one in your office and hop over right over there. The whole entire thing now literally takes 23 seconds.
Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at Stanford. It is also separate from Dr. Andy Galpin's teaching and research roles at Cal State Fullerton. It is, however, part of our desire and effort to bring zero cost to consumer information about science and science-related tools to the general public. In keeping with that theme, we'd like to thank the sponsors of today's podcast. Our first sponsor is Momentous. Momentous makes supplements of the absolute highest quality. The Huberman Lab podcast is proud to be partnering with Momentous for several important reasons. First of all, as I mentioned, their supplements are of extremely high quality. Second of all, their supplements are generally in single ingredient formulations. If you're going to develop a supplementation protocol, you're going to want to focus mainly on using single ingredient formulations. With single ingredient formulations, you can devise the most logical and effective and cost-effective supplementation regimen for your goals. In addition, Momentous supplements ship internationally. And this is, of course, important because we realize that many of the Huberman Lab podcast listeners reside outside the United States. If you'd like to try the various supplements mentioned on the Huberman Lab podcast, in particular supplements for hormone health, for sleep optimization, for focus, as well as a number of other things, including exercise recovery, you can go to Live Momentous, spelled O-U-S, so that's livemomentous.com/Huberman. Today's episode is also brought to us by Levels. Levels is a program that lets you see how different foods and activities affect your health by giving you real-time feedback on your blood glucose using a continuous glucose monitor. Many people are aware that their blood sugar, that is their blood glucose level, is critical for everything from fat loss to muscle gain, to healthy cognition, and indeed, aging of the brain and body. Most people do not know, however, how different foods and different activities, including exercise or different temperatured environments, impact their blood glucose levels. And yet blood glucose is exquisitely sensitive to all of those things. I first started using Levels about a year ago as a way to understand how different foods, exercise, and timing of food relative to exercise and quality of sleep at night impact my blood glucose levels. And I've learned a tremendous amount from using Levels. It's taught me when best to eat, what best to eat, when best to exercise, how best to exercise, and how to modulate my entire schedule from work to exercise and even my sleep. So if you're interested in learning more about Levels and trying a continuous glucose monitor yourself, go to levels.link/Huberman. That's levels.link/Huberman. Today's episode is also brought to us by Element. Element is an electrolyte drink that contains the exact ratios of the electrolytes sodium, magnesium, and potassium to optimize cellular functioning for mental and physical performance. Most people realize that hydration is key. We need to ingest enough fluids in order to feel our best and perform our best. But what most people do not realize is that the proper functioning of our cells and nerve cells, neurons in particular, requires that sodium, magnesium, and potassium be present in the correct ratios. Now, of course, people with prehypertension and hypertension need to be careful about their sodium intake. But what a lot of people don't realize is that if you drink caffeine, if you exercise, and in particular, if you're following a very clean diet, that is not a lot of processed foods, which of course is a good thing, chances are you're not getting enough sodium, potassium, and magnesium to optimize mental and physical performance. Element contains a science-backed ratio of 1,000 milligrams, that's 1 gram of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium, and no sugar. If you'd like to try Element, you can go to Drink Element, that's lmnt.com/Huberman, to get a free Element sample pack with your purchase. Again, that's Drink Element, lmnt.com/Huberman, to claim a free sample pack. So tell me about endurance. What is endurance? How do I get more endurance? And how does it work?
When we think about endurance, I would like to open up the conversation to include more things than people generally do when they hear the word endurance. So if we just think about what you typically ask your body to do or would like to ask your body to do, and we just walk through them, it's going to be things like this. Number one, I want to have energy throughout the day. That's actually a form of endurance. Great. I don't want to have these lulls and fatigue, and I want to feel fantastic as I move throughout my activities of daily living, whatever those may be. Work,